Give me another 30 seconds, Uncle Warren. This knee and I are still negotiating. A metallic sound came from behind the half-open door. A click, then silence. Then another click, like something slipping out of its groove. Emmett Kavanaugh stopped in the middle of the basement corridor, finishing a late-night unannounced walk of the property. Outside, Chicago was still dark, wind off the lake moving down streets no one had woken up to yet. Inside the basement of the Ardmore Hotel, one of 31 properties carrying his family's name, the light fell across gray tile and a door marked, "Linen Room Staff Only." Cormac Doyle took half a step forward and asked if he should knock. Emmett only raised a hand. He moved closer, close enough to see through the gap. A woman sat on a wooden stool between two shelves stacked with white towels folded into neat squares. The left leg of her gray uniform was rolled above the knee. She was trying to fit a prosthetic leg onto what remained of that leg. The prosthetic was old. The plastic of the socket had yellowed. One strap was frayed down to a few threads, and every time she pressed down, the locking pin slid away before it could catch. Beside her, a gray-haired man in a work jacket stood with his arms folded, telling her to stop forcing it. She said she wasn't forcing it. She was negotiating. He said she'd been negotiating a long while now. She said that meant they were probably close to an agreement. He shook his head, though the corner of his mouth lifted, and told her to go home. The night log could wait for someone else in the morning. She answered that if someone else did it, she'd spend an hour tomorrow just guessing what they'd written down. Another click. This time the pin caught. She gripped the edge of the shelf and stood, easing her weight down slowly, careful as someone testing a plank laid across a creek. Her shoulders tightened for about a second. She made no sound. Then she said, "See, both parties have reached an agreement." Emmett was still standing outside the door. He could not remember the last time he had waited outside a door in a building he owned. He turned to Cormac and asked quietly how many properties the company held across the Midwest. 31, Cormac said. 9 of them hotels. Emmett looked at that frayed strap a moment longer, then said he wanted to know why someone working in his building had to sit in a linen room in the middle of the night, fixing her own leg with her hands. Cormac did not answer right away. Inside, the woman reached for a ceramic mug on the shelf, its faded lettering reading, "One step at a time." She took a sip, tucked a worn green leather notebook under her arm, and walked out into the corridor. Her first 3 steps came uneven. By the 4th, she had found her rhythm. She passed Emmett Kavanaugh, without knowing who she had just passed, and without knowing that inside the notebook she had held against her chest for 7 years, there was a letter from a dead man, written to the very man who had just stood watching her. The man sitting across from Emmett Kavanaugh was named Royce Tanner, and he had begun to sweat before anyone had spoken a word. Emmett didn't sit down right away. He took off his gray wool coat, folded it, laid it over the back of a chair, and only then pulled out his seat. Cormac Doyle stood a few steps away, his hands clasped in front of his stomach, silent as a post. There was only one beige file folder on the table. Emmett slid it toward Royce with 2 fingers. Slowly, the way someone might push a cup of tea toward a guest. Royce glanced down at the folder but didn't touch it. He began speaking first, speaking quickly, saying there might have been a minor misunderstanding in the shipping process, that the materials market had been difficult this year, that he had always dealt honestly with the Kavanaugh family all this time and had never given anyone a single thing to complain about. Emmett let him finish. He didn't interrupt, didn't nod, didn't show a thing. When Royce stopped, because he had run out of breath, the room settled into a silence so long that the sound of his own breathing became unmistakable. Emmett opened the folder, turned a few pages, then stopped at a page printed with a comparison chart. 6 buildings, he said. His voice wasn't any louder than someone ordering another cup of coffee. You signed for first-grade materials, you delivered third-grade materials, and you pocketed the difference. 6 buildings, 32 months. The final figure is on page 14, if you'd like to check it for me. Royce opened his mouth. Emmett turned one more page. There was no chart on that page, only a short list. He read it aloud, calmly, as though he were reading a delivery record. Royce's wife's name, where she worked, the names of his 2 children, the school they attended, the address of the house in Oak Lawn that he had just paid off that spring. When he finished, he closed the folder and placed his palm over its cover. Royce Tanner had stopped sweating. He had moved into something worse than that, the state of a man who had just realized that what threatened him wasn't anger, but calm. "You're threatening me," Royce said. The words came out rough and hoarse. Emmett looked at him for a long moment. "If I meant to threaten you," he replied, "I wouldn't have needed to read any of it aloud. I just showed you that I know what you have to lose." That's why I'm still sitting here talking to you instead of doing anything." He stood, picked up his coat, and draped it over his arm. A faint streak of cement dust clung to the sleeve of the expensive wool, and he didn't bother brushing it away. "You have 1 week," Emmett said. "During that week, you write down everything yourself. Who approved your invoices on my corporation's side, who signed off on the completed work, who looked the other way. You write enough, and I'll let you sit at the negotiating table instead of in the defendant's chair. You leave out one name, and next week I'll be the one speaking for you, and then you won't get to choose what gets said." He walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped, but he didn't turn around. "Mr. Tanner, 3 of those 6 buildings are rental apartments. People live in them. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it so you'll understand why I won't forget this, even if you give the money back." The door closed behind him. In the car, Cormac said nothing for a long while. Emmett leaned back in his seat, looking out the window, and Cormac knew exactly what that silence meant. 7 years of working beside this man had taught him one thing, that Emmett Kavanagh spoke the least at the exact moments when he was thinking the most. At last, Cormac spoke. "Do you think he'll write?" "He'll write. Because he's afraid? Because he just paid off his house," Emmett said. "People only take risks when they have nothing left. When they've just gained something, they become very obedient." Cormac nodded, then opened the file resting on his lap. "There's something you asked me for this morning." Emmett turned toward him. "Her personnel file?" "Josephine Malloy," Cormac said. 7 years at the Ardmore Hotel. I've only skimmed the first page, but there's one part I think you should see first." "Which part?" Cormac hesitated for half a second, and that was a rare half second for a man like him. In 7 years, she hasn't missed a single shift without giving notice. "Not one shift, sir, but her most recent performance evaluation says she meets only the minimum standard." Emmett didn't answer. He held out his hand, and Cormac placed the file into it. That morning, the man who had just made a contractor tremble simply by reading out a few names sat in silence for a long time before a thin stack of papers, unopened, as though he already sensed that whatever lay inside would be far harder to face than anything he had just done. The Ardmore Hotel's quarterly operating report ran 19 pages, and Emmett read it from the highest floor of the building that bore his family name, where floor-to-ceiling windows stretched around him, and the whole city lay below like a map someone had set lights into. He read slowly. Room occupancy had exceeded its target. Personnel costs remained within the permitted range. Guest satisfaction had risen by 1.8% from the previous quarter. Staff turnover had declined. Maintenance costs had fallen by 4%, and the person who wrote the report had printed that figure in bold, with a small note saying it was the result of optimizing contractor agreements. Emmett paused over that line longer than he had over the others. He had read thousands of reports like this in his life, and he knew one thing the people who prepared them never put into writing, that maintenance costs don't simply go down, they are only moved from today to someday in the future. Cormac stood waiting beside him, holding the personnel file he had not yet been given permission to open. Emmett turned to the last page. There, under the heading Personnel, beneath a chart made up entirely of blue columns, was a single line printed in smaller type than the rest. No outstanding individual contributions recorded during this period. He read it a second time. Then he set the report on the desk, turned it around, and slid it toward Cormac. "Read the last line for me." Cormac read it. "I have, sir. What do you see?" "I see a line every branch fills in the same way." "All 31 buildings?" "Nearly." Emmett tapped the desk once with his finger. "Then either I own 31 buildings without a single person worth naming, or I'm paying people to write reports who have never stood and watched their employees work." Cormac didn't answer. He had learned that there were things Emmett said not because he was waiting for a reply. At that same moment, several miles away in the basement of the Ardmore Hotel, Warren Pike pulled a heavy ring of keys from a steel cabinet and set it on the metal table in front of Josie. There were 6 keys on the ring, each one bearing a plastic tag yellowed from the sweat of generations of maintenance workers' hands. Josie looked at it, then at him. "Why are you giving me this?" "Night shift," Warren said. "Starting this week, you keep it. I'm a housekeeper, Uncle Warren. You're the only housekeeper in this hotel who has read the entire operations manual, every last page, even the appendix that I haven't ever finished reading myself." Josie picked up the ring and turned over each plastic tag. Basement electrical cabinet, west wing fire valves, east wing fire valves, emergency stairwell door, mechanical room. She stopped at the last key, the one without a tag, with only a loop of steel wire around it. "What's this one?" "The main circuit breaker for the east wing." I've asked to have the lock replaced 3 times. No one has approved it. She set the keys down. You know what people will say during the day. They'll say a room attendant is carrying the keys to the mechanical room. People can say whatever they like, Warren replied. But every night there are only 4 people here, and of those 4, I want this ring of keys in the hands of the person who'll know what needs to be opened before she opens it. Josie was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled the keys closer, threaded them onto the hook of her uniform belt, and tightened it. They were heavier than she had expected. I'll give them back when I hand over the shift. No, you keep them. That night passed as ordinarily as every other night. A guest on the 23rd floor lost his room keycard. The coffee machine in the lobby stopped running water, and Josie fixed it by unplugging it and plugging it back in, a technique she told the young front desk clerk had saved human civilization more times than people realized. Ruth Delacroix made her rounds, handing out coffee, and made a new employee finish the sandwich he had been hiding beneath the counter. Near the end of the shift, the central system flashed a brief warning in the east wing, then shut itself off before anyone had time to press confirm. Josie sat down in the duty chair, pulled a blue leather notebook from the desk drawer, and opened it to the page she had been writing on. There were already 28 lines on it, all written in the same hand, all very short. She picked up her pen and added the 29th line. She wrote nothing else, underlined nothing, marked nothing. She only closed the notebook, placed it on her lap, and sat watching the monitoring screens until the sky outside began to pale. At opposite ends of the city, on the same night, 2 people were reading numbers about the same building. One read them on printed paper, behind glass 42 stories above the ground. The other wrote them by hand in the basement, never imagining that one day someone high above might be willing to bend down and read her handwriting. The mezzanine conference room had a glass wall looking directly down into the service lobby, and Emmett chose the seat at the head of the table with his back to the projection screen, so he could listen while keeping his eyes on the space beyond the glass. Trent Boyle stood beside the projector with the remote in his hand, his tie knotted tighter than a morning briefing required. A bar chart filled the screen. Regarding the unconfirmed alarm incidents, Trent said, we've reviewed all of them. The primary cause is guests smoking in their rooms and in the hallway areas. We've increased the number of no smoking signs and added notes to the room regulations. The figure remains within the industry's acceptable range. Emmett didn't look at the screen. He was looking through the glass, where a woman in a gray uniform stood comparing a logbook against a room list, a blue leather notebook tucked beneath her arm. How many incidents in the past 2 months? He asked. Trent glanced down at the printed report. 29, sir. And the month before that? 11. Emmett turned back toward him. From 11 to 29, and you still call that the industry's acceptable range. We believe it's a seasonal fluctuation, sir. During the colder months, guests spend more time in their rooms. Emmett looked through the glass once more, then called out, Miss Malloy. Everyone in the room turned. Josie looked over her shoulder, then pointed to her own chest, and Emmett nodded once. She opened the door and stepped inside, her first 3 steps slightly uneven, the notebook still tucked beneath her arm. Trent lowered the remote. Sir, Miss Malloy is with housekeeping. She doesn't attend operations meetings. She does today, Emmett said. He pointed toward the screen. Mr. Boyle believes the unconfirmed alarms are caused by guests smoking. What do you think? Josie looked at Trent, then at Warren Pike, who sat at the far end of the table. Warren gave the slightest nod. I don't think that's right, she said. Trent folded his arms. Based on what? Based on the guests' calls. Guest calls aren't technical data, but they're still data. Emmett pulled out the empty chair beside him. Tell me what you've seen. Josie didn't sit. She placed the notebook on the table and opened it. The page was filled with neat, tiny handwritten columns, dates, room numbers, times during each shift, and a few brief notes. All 29 incidents happened in the East Wing, she said. Not one happened in the West Wing. Not a single one. Trent frowned. The East Wing has more rooms. 4 more rooms, sir. Not 29 to none. Someone in the middle of the table cleared his throat softly. Josie turned to the next page, and every one of them happened after the old steam system had been running continuously for more than 2 hours. I write down the time the boiler comes on every night. There hasn't been one alarm before that point. Not one. The room fell silent for a beat. Trent moved closer to the table and held out his hand toward the notebook. Where did you get these figures? I wrote them down during my shifts, sir. Who assigned you to do that? No one, sir. Then I don't understand why a housekeeper would conduct her own technical investigation. Warren Pike spoke from the far end of the table, his voice quiet. Because she saw a pattern. That isn't within the scope of her job. No, Warren said. It's part of the way she does her job. Trent turned to Emmett. Sir, the old steam pipes have been inspected. They're listed as equipment that meets the required standard. At what temperature were they inspected? Josie asked. Trent turned back to her. Under the current standards. For how long, sir? He didn't answer at once. Emmett leaned back in his chair. Do you know that number? The engineering department keeps the full inspection procedures. Josie closed the notebook, though she kept her hand resting on its cover. I'm not saying the fire alarm system is broken. I'm saying something in the East Wing is making it sound when it shouldn't. And every time it sounds for the wrong reason, and we write it off as guests smoking. Then the next time it sounds for the right reason, no one will run anymore. No one said a word. Emmett tapped the report in front of him with one finger. This document says the primary cause is guess. Was Miss Malloy's information considered before that conclusion was written? Trent kept his voice even. I wasn't aware that she had been gathering anything. Warren placed both hands on the table. Her notes have been attached to the night shift reports for 6 consecutive weeks. Every week. Trent looked at Warren, then down at the printed report. I receive a great deal of paperwork every week. I see, Emmett said. He didn't add another word. He simply reached for the blue leather notebook, turned it toward himself, and studied the dense handwritten columns, as if he were looking at a language he had never learned, but understood at once. Then he pushed it back toward Josie. Give Mr. Pike every room number and time marker you recorded. Mr. Pike, tonight run the East Wing boiler for 1 additional hour beyond its cycle, and document everything. Trent stepped forward half a pace. That requires approval from regional engineering. I've just approved it, Emmett said. The meeting ended 7 minutes earlier than scheduled. Everyone left the room, folding their papers, nodding goodbye to one another, and not one of them said a single word to Josie Malloy about the fact that she had been right while they had been wrong for 6 straight weeks. Emmett carried the file into an empty office on the mezzanine floor, a room with windows overlooking the service lobby, and opened it the moment the door closed behind them. Cormac stood beside him without sitting down. The first page was a timesheet. 7 years. Emmett ran his finger down the columns, month after month, winter after winter, and he couldn't find a single blank space without a note beside it. No sick leave lasting more than 1 consecutive day. No unannounced absences. 3 last-minute shift changes, and all 3 had been shifts she took to cover someone else. Check it again for me, Emmett said. 7 years without missing a shift means either she's healthier than all of us, or someone filled it in for her. I matched it against the badge swipe system. Every day checks out. The next page contained guest correspondence. 17 letters, some handwritten on hotel stationery, others printed from emails. A woman thanked her for recovering a wedding ring that had fallen into a sink drain. A man wrote that his wife used a wheelchair, and that this was the first hotel on their trip where she hadn't had to wait for someone to help her. Another letter was only 3 lines long, written by the son of an elderly guest who had passed away, thanking the night shift girl who had sat talking with his mother for nearly an hour on a night when she couldn't sleep. Emmett read every one of the 17 letters. Then he turned to the most recent performance evaluation. In the conclusion box was a pre-stamped phrase, meets the minimum standard. He turned back to the previous evaluation. The same phrase, the one before that. Still the same, 7 years, 14 evaluations, and not once had that phrase changed by a single word. Do you see anything strange? Emmett asked. Cormac bent down to look. No one falls below it, but no one rises above it either. Exactly. They didn't evaluate her. They put a label on her and left it there. In the second half of the file were 3 sheets of paper clipped separately with a rusted paperclip. All 3 were internal transfer requests, all signed by Warren Pike, each submitted about a year apart. Emmett read the first one. Warren wrote that Josephine Malloy could read system diagrams better than most of the technicians on staff, that she was the only person on the night shift who noticed a problem before it had time to create an expense, and that he recommended transferring her to the building engineering department at its lowest position, as an apprentice, with no raise required. The second letter was nearly identical, only longer, with 3 specific examples added. The third was the shortest, and in its final line, Warren had written something Emmett had to read twice. I have requested this twice before, and received no reason. This time, I am asking only for a reason. Beneath each page, in the response box, was the same typed sentence, with no signature, no specific date, and no name of the person responsible. Professional qualifications not suited to the proposed position. 3 times. The same sentence. Not 1 comma out of place. Emmett laid the 3 pages side by side on the desk. Find me the originals, he said. The versions Mr. Pike sent before they reached corporate. It took Cormac nearly 2 hours. When he returned, he held 3 newly printed copies in his hands, and his expression had changed. Emmett placed the originals on the left, the copies kept in the personnel file on the right, and began comparing them line by line. In the original, Warren wrote that she could read system diagrams better than most of the technicians on staff. In the version in the file, that sentence was gone. In the original, Warren listed 3 times she had caught problems early, with dates and room numbers included. In the version in the file, all 3 examples had been compressed into a single sentence. Employee demonstrates a positive work attitude. The original included a line stating that she was taking fire safety classes in the evenings. In the version in the file, that line didn't exist. Emmett sat for a long time before those 2 stacks of paper. Who has the authority to make edits? He asked. The request goes from the hotel to corporate human resources, then to the approval department, Cormac said. Along the way, it stops in only one place. Human resources. Yes, sir. Who opened the file? Cormac hesitated. I can access the logs from the past 3 years. Anything older is in the old archive. Emmett closed the file and rested his palm on its cover, in exactly the same way he had placed his hand on a file in that Southside warehouse a few days earlier. Get all the access logs, he said. And don't let anyone know what we're looking at. 7 years, 17 letters from strangers, 3 recommendations from a man nearing retirement, and 1 typed sentence repeated 3 times like a stamp pressed onto someone's life. Emmett Kavanaugh had spent the entire morning reading a thin file, and what kept him in that room throughout the afternoon wasn't what people had written inside it, but what they had quietly erased. Ruth Delacroix set the plate in front of Josie without asking whether she wanted food, because in 7 years she had never asked. Egg sandwich, she said. Finish it. Don't make Uncle Warren remind you. I ate something around midnight. You chewed a peppermint. I saw you. Then she walked away, and a little while later, Emmett Kavanaugh pulled out the chair across from Josie and sat down. He hadn't brought a file with him. Josie looked at him, then at the plate, then pushed it toward the middle of the table. If you're planning to ask questions for a while, you should eat half. Ruth checks the plate, not your stomach. He took 1 half. It was the first thing that morning that made her look at him for longer than a second. I read your file, Emmett said. I figured. It says you study at night. I've been doing that for 3 years. What are you studying? Fire safety and building construction. He set down his half of the sandwich. You could study accounting, nursing, anything that pays more and doesn't make you sit in a classroom after a 10-hour night shift. I know. Then why that field? Josie turned the fork once in her hand. Beyond the glass doors, the service lobby was beginning to fill. Linen carts rolling past, someone calling someone else from the far end. She didn't lower her voice, and she didn't look down. My father was an electrician, she said. He did maintenance in a rental building on the north side. He worked there for 19 years. What was his name? Desmond Malloy. Emmett nodded once. The name meant nothing to him yet. The winter I turned 20. He took the night shift for 3 straight weeks because someone had called in sick. My mother worked nights at a laundry plant, so in the evenings it was just me at home. I'd cook dinner and bring it to him. I did it almost every night for all 3 weeks. She paused. That night, I got there about 20 minutes later than usual because the bus route had changed. And then, the building caught fire, Josie said. My father didn't get out. She said it in the same voice she used to read room numbers over the radio. Emmett said nothing. He had sat across from many people in his life, and he knew which silences were meant to wait and which were meant to remain silent. I lost my left leg that night, she continued. That part was simpler. They stitched me up, gave me crutches, and sent me home. And your father? They gave him a piece of paper. Emmett looked up. The investigation report was 11 pages long, Josie said. I read it so many times I memorized every page number. The first 10 pages talked about wiring, electrical loads, schematics. On the last page, there was 1 line of conclusion. They wrote that the cause was operator error by the technician on duty. She set down her fork. There was only 1 technician on duty in that building that night, so they didn't need to write his name. Everyone who read it knew who they meant. Someone at a nearby table laughed. Josie waited for the sound to pass. My father was the most careful person I've ever known. Before he left any mechanical room, he always turned back to look at the electrical panel 1 more time. My mother used to tease him that he was saying goodbye to the breaker box. He wasn't the kind of man who pressed the wrong thing. Did you appeal it? My mother filed a complaint. What happened? Josie looked at him for a moment. Nothing happened. Then I started working, and my mother stopped talking about it. Emmett let that answer rest between them. Something had just shifted faintly in his mind. A vague sense that there was a missing piece somewhere in this story, though he still couldn't see where it belonged. That's why I study, Josie said. Not to get revenge on anyone. I don't have enough money to get revenge on anyone. I study because I want to understand how that system works. And because there's one thing I realized after reading all 11 pages of that report. What? The person who signs last is always the first person blamed, she said. The person who buys cheap materials doesn't sign anything. The person who approves the invoice writes one small signature in the corner. But the person on duty that night, the person holding the keys, the person who presses the final button, their name is written clearly in the logbook. And when something happens, all anyone has to do is open that one book. She stood, lifting the plate. I'm studying so that one day I'll be the one who signs, but I'll sign only after I've read. She carried the plate away. Emmett remained in the service lobby, surrounded by the sound of carts and telephones, with half an egg sandwich untouched on the table and a name newly placed in his memory, never knowing then that he would have to find it again in a dark records warehouse, beneath his own signature. The room Emmett chose to meet Trent Boyle in was a small conference room at the end of the mezzanine hallway, the kind people use to interview applicants or tell someone something that shouldn't be said where others might walk by. 3 sheets of paper lay on the table. Trent came in, tightened his tie with a familiar motion, and sat down before he was invited. You sent for me. Emmett didn't answer. He turned the 3 pages around and pushed them toward Trent. The first was the inspection acceptance report for the East Wing steam pipe materials, bearing Trent's signature in the lower right corner. The second was the quarterly maintenance cost statement, with the note about optimizing contractor agreements highlighted in bold. The third was a list of all unconfirmed alarm incidents over the past 2 months, printed directly from the central system before anyone had altered it. Trent looked at the 3 sheets. He didn't touch them. He began to say that accepting materials was a standard procedure across the entire system, not an individual decision. That the figures in the cost statement had been compiled by accounting rather than written by him, that he had worked there for nearly 9 years, and in those 9 years there had never been a single incident in that building. Emmett let him finish. When Trent stopped, the room was so quiet they could hear an elevator moving behind the wall. Mr. Boyle, Emmett said, I don't care how much you took. I care that you sat in that meeting yesterday morning, knew these 3 sheets existed, and still let a night shift employee stand there alone without a single person speaking for her. That was the only thing he said. Trent opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. The color drained from his face slowly, turning from red to something paler. He reached for the pen on the table, pulled the blank sheet from beneath the others toward him, and began to write. Emmett didn't watch him write. He turned toward the window and looked down at the service lobby below, where a linen cart was being pushed slowly along the hallway. When Trent set down the pen, the sheet before him was a 4-line resignation letter, with no reason given, only a date and a signature. May I leave at the end of the month? Trent asked. You may leave at the end of this week, Emmett said, and you'll sit down with Mr. Doyle for 2 full handover sessions. If a single name is missing from the handover records, I'll find it myself. You already know how quickly I can find things. Trent nodded. He stood, walked out, and paused at the threshold for half a second as if he meant to say something, then decided against it. That afternoon, Emmett called Cormac. You've obtained the access logs from the past 3 years. Where is the rest? In the records warehouse in the basement of the main building, sir. All files from before the system conversion are stored there, paper records and hard drive backups. I want to go down there. That warehouse requires an operations department access code. Then get the code. Less than 10 minutes after. Emmett put down the phone. Hollis Bramwell knocked on the door. He didn't wait to be invited in, but he didn't enter completely either. He stood halfway across the threshold, one hand still on the doorknob, his posture straight, his gray suit immaculate, with the gentle manner of a man who had sat in rooms like this since before Emmett knew how to read a contract. I hear you just let Mr. Boyle go. He resigned. Same thing. Hollis closed the door behind him. I haven't come to defend him. I came because I heard you asked for the records warehouse code. That's right. What do you plan to find down there? The old access logs. I want to know who altered Mr. Pike's 3 transfer requests. Hollis nodded slowly, as though he were considering the matter in earnest. You won't find it. Why not? because the system conversion lost a section of the logs. Everyone in operations knows that. The paper copies remain, but the electronic logs are incomplete for nearly 2 years. He stepped forward and placed a thin file on the desk. As for this, I think you should review it first. The maintenance contract for the cluster of 4 buildings south of here is about to expire. If you intend to clean up the materials situation, beginning here would be much more effective than digging through a few transfer requests for a housekeeping employee. Emmett looked at the file. Then he looked at Hollis. You still think there are only a few transfer requests? I think you own 31 buildings, Hollis said, his voice still gentle, almost affectionate, and I watched you sign the first contract of your life. I only want you to spend your time where it's worth spending. Then he left. Emmett remained at his desk with the unopened file before him, and for one very brief moment, he felt as though someone had guided him through a doorway without allowing him to see what was behind it. The feeling lasted only a few seconds. Then he pushed the file aside, picked up the phone, and told Cormac to get that code, no matter what it took. Cormac secured the code late the following afternoon, and Emmett went down to the records warehouse alone. He told Cormac to stay upstairs, not because he didn't trust him, but because he still didn't know what he was looking for, and he didn't want anyone standing there watching while he felt his way through it. The warehouse was in the basement of the main building, rows of metal shelving stretching beneath fluorescent lights, each shelf 5 levels high, each level holding about 30 cardboard boxes. An old directory was taped to the wall, dividing files by year and department code. Emmett began with the most recent section and worked backward. He was no longer looking for access logs. Hollis had been right about one thing. The electronic logs from that period really were incomplete, and Cormac had confirmed it. But standing among those shelves, Emmett suddenly realized something simple that no one had mentioned all week. If Warren Pike's transfer requests had been stripped down along the way, that was only a very small piece of it. The more important question was why, at the Ardmore Hotel, they had replaced the old steam system without replacing the entire bank of sensors that went with it. And the answer to that question wouldn't be in personnel records. It would be in the procurement files. It took him nearly 2 hours to find that section. The boxes there were heavier, their cardboard softer, dust thick across their lids. He pulled down the first one, sat on an old plastic chair someone had left behind long ago, and began to turn through it. Purchase orders, price comparison reports, vendor reconciliation sheets. Most of it was so tedious his eyes passed over the pages without holding on to anything. Then he opened the 4th box. Inside was a packet clipped apart from the rest, its title printed in bold. Approval for fire alarm equipment supplier conversion, consolidation phase. Emmett pulled it out. The packet was thick. The first page compared 2 vendors. The old supplier cost about 37% more. The new supplier, Ridgeline Systems, was cheaper, had faster delivery times, and in the final column was a typed remark. Meets the minimum standard, recommended for use in non-priority areas. Emmett read that phrase again. Non-priority areas. He turned the page. On page 9 was an itemized list of equipment replaced during the conversion. Smoke sensors, central control units, signal transmitters, and in the attached technical specifications, in a small note at the very bottom, was a line the person who wrote it likely never expected anyone to read. Response time is prolonged in conditions of high humidity and elevated temperatures. Not recommended for use in areas near steam systems. Emmett sat up straighter. He turned the pages more quickly. The list of buildings included in the conversion was on page 14, a long column of internal codes. No building names, only codes. He counted them. 27 properties. He turned to the final page, and there, beneath the words, approved by, was a signature. He stared at it for a long time. It was his signature, not the signature he used now. The compact, clipped one he wrote dozens of times a day. This was his old signature, the signature of a man not yet accustomed to putting his name on things that carried weight. The final stroke still extending a little too far, the loop in the K still rounded the way people are taught to write in school. He knew exactly when it belonged to. It was the summer he was 26, the summer his father died, the summer they led him into a room with glass walls, and told him that from then on, everything stopped with him. He remembered that afternoon. He remembered the stack of documents on the desk, so high it had to be divided into 3 columns. He remembered Hollis Bramwell sitting beside him, turning each packet, pointing at each blank space with the tip of his pen, saying these matters had already been reviewed at lower levels, that Emmett's signature was only the final formality, that if he read everything, 4 months would pass before he finished, and the entire system would stand still during those 4 months. He remembered signing 140 pages in a single afternoon. He hadn't read a single page. Emmett lowered the packet into his lap. In his mind, the scattered pieces from the past few days began slipping into their proper places, slowly and coldly, like marbles rolling into grooves. 29 false alarms in the East Wing. Old steam pipes running longer than 2 hours. One small note no one had read. One conclusion on the final page of an 11-page report. A conclusion a woman had memorized down to every page number. He thought of breakfast the day before, of the egg sandwich pushed into the middle of the table, of her calm voice when she said the person who signed last was always the first person blamed. He looked down at his signature again, that still rounded signature of a 26-year-old man who believed he was only completing a formality. There were no clocks and no windows in the records warehouse. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Dust floated in the pale stream of light. Emmett Kavanaugh sat motionless on the plastic chair between 2 rows of metal shelves, the packet open across his lap, both hands resting along the edges of the paper. And he didn't stand, didn't call anyone, didn't turn another page. Emmett called Josie up to an empty office on the mezzanine at the beginning of the morning shift the next day, and the first thing she noticed when she walked in was that he hadn't slept. Not because his eyes were red, but because he was still wearing the shirt from the day before. "You called for me. Sit down." She sat. He didn't begin with any praise, and later, when she thought back on it, she believed that was the only reason she stayed long enough to hear him out. "I want to transfer you to the building technical department," Emmett said, "starting this week. The position involves reviewing equipment records and reconciling operating logs. The pay will be at the apprentice technician rate." Josie said nothing for several seconds. "Are you doing this because of that morning before?" "No." "Then because of my notebook?" "Not exactly." He pushed a thin file toward her but didn't open it. "I'm going to be direct, because I think you're the kind of person who'll know immediately if I try to talk around it. I need to review the equipment procurement records for this entire system over the past several years. It requires someone who can read diagrams, cross-check information, and sit with paperwork for dozens of hours without complaining. There are hundreds of people in your company who can do that." "That's true," Emmett said. "And every one of them has been inside this system since before I began asking questions. Every one of them has someone above them, and that person has someone above them too. If I give the records to any one of them, someone will know what I'm reading before I finish the 3rd page." He looked straight at her. "You don't owe anyone here. No one promoted you. No one protected you. For 7 years, they haven't given you a single reason to be loyal to them." Josie sat quietly. Beyond the glass door, a linen cart rolled past, and its left wheel still made the exact sound she had meant to ask maintenance to oil the week before. "So you didn't choose me because I'm good at this," she said. "You chose me because I have no one to report back to." "Yes. You aren't going to make that sound a little nicer?" "I could make it sound nicer," Emmett replied. "But then you'd find out the real reason yourself, and after that you wouldn't believe another word I said. I need you to trust what I tell you over the next few months, so I'm giving you the difficult part up front." Josie looked down at her hands resting in her lap. Her nails were cut short, and her fingertips were calloused in the exact places 7 years of gripping damp towels and cleaning rags had left behind. "Do you know what people will say tomorrow?" she asked. "I know. They'll say the girl who cleans rooms caught the owner's eye. They'll say the prosthetic leg came in useful. I'll hear it in the elevators, in the employee dining room, behind my back in the hallways, and not one of them will say it to my face so I can answer them." "You'll hear it," Emmett said. "I can't stop that. I can issue an announcement, but an announcement will only make them say it louder." Josie nodded slowly. Then she looked up. "Then I have one condition. Tell me. If I make one mistake, I go back to pushing the linen cart myself. You don't fire me. Nobody holds a meeting about it. I'll go downstairs, get my old uniform back, and no one will have to explain anything to anyone. What counts as one mistake? Giving you a number I haven't checked twice myself," she said. "I'm not afraid of making a technical mistake. That can be fixed. I'm afraid that one day you'll hold up my paperwork in front of other people and find a place where I guessed. Then neither you nor I will have anywhere left to go." Emmett watched her for a long moment. "Agreed," he said. "And I have one condition too. Go ahead. You don't change anything to make me look better. If the records prove I was wrong, you put them on my desk exactly as they are." Josie stood, tucking the blue leather notebook beneath her arm. "That I can do," she said. "That's the only thing I know how to do." By noon the next day, the entire hotel knew. By afternoon, people were already stopping their conversations when she passed through the employee dining room. Ruth Delacroix set a larger-than-usual lunchbox on Josie's table and said only one thing, that people spread rumors because none of them had ever had to sit for 3 hours in the linen room putting their own leg back together. Josie said nothing to anyone. She accepted the key to the records room, sat down, opened the first box, and began to read. Josie's new workstation was on the 31st floor of the main building, positioned beside the records room door, and the chair waiting for her couldn't be adjusted for height. She tried the lever underneath it 3 times. It made a sound, then stopped. When she sat down, the edge of the seat pressed against the exact rim of her prosthetic socket. And after about 15 minutes, that spot began telling her it didn't approve. She stood, went to find the floor's administrative manager, and was told that the request for an adjustable chair was already in the system and awaiting approval. How long will that take? Facilities processes those requests in batches. Would it be faster if I asked again? Asking too often can sometimes slow the process down. Josie nodded, went down 1 floor, then came back with a stack of neatly folded bath towels from a housekeeping cart. She placed the towels beneath the desk, rested her left foot on them, and tried sitting again. The pressure shifted away from the edge of the socket. She straightened in her chair and opened the first records box of the day. By the 4th day, the top of the towel stack had turned gray, and Josie had finished reading 4 boxes. The technical review took place that afternoon, concerning the plan to reinstall the sensor array on 2 floors of the Ardmore Hotel's East Wing. She was allowed to attend in her role as records reviewer. On the projection screen was a floor plan, small circles marking detector locations, arrows showing the direction of airflow. Josie studied the drawing for a long moment, then raised her hand. The meeting chair saw her and kept speaking. She lowered her hand. A few minutes later, she raised it again. Miss Malloy. The detector in the middle hallway is directly beneath the air return vent, she said. The airflow there moves sideways. Smoke will be pushed past it instead of gathering long enough. If it's moved about 3 feet toward the wall, it will be outside the interference zone. The meeting chair looked at the drawing, then at her. That location follows the manufacturer's standard layout. The standard layout doesn't include an old steam system running alongside it. We don't redesign the plan for every person, building, but we install it in every building. He tapped his pen once against the table, very softly, and moved to the next page. Please make a note of that, Miss Malloy. That's your role here today. Josie opened her blue leather notebook and wrote down 1 line. 11 minutes later, once the discussion had reached costs, an engineer seated across from her looked up and said he had just reconsidered the middle hallway array, that the detector there was too close to the air return vent, and that it might be best to move it about 3 feet toward the wall to avoid airflow interference. The meeting chair nodded at once. Good idea. Put it in the minutes. A technical recommendation. Josie didn't look up. She turned to an inside page of her notebook and wrote another line, shorter than the first. Same idea, different voice. Then she closed the notebook and remained through the rest of the meeting. Late that afternoon, after the conference room had emptied, she returned to her desk, pulled the stack of towels beneath it a little closer until it fit better, and opened the 5th records box. That same afternoon, on a higher floor, Emmett told Cormac to prepare a complete inventory of every procurement records box still stored in the basement archive. Every one of them, with none left out. He hadn't told anyone what he had found down there. He hadn't told Josie either. He only wanted to know how many more files carried the rounded signature of a 26-year-old man. Hollis Bramwell arrived while Emmett was reviewing the inventory. This time, he didn't knock. He merely pushed the door partly open and stood in the doorway, a file in his hand. I hear you've assigned people to inventory the entire archive. That's right. Every box? Every box. Hollis nodded, then walked in and set the file on the desk. Look at this first. The city has just opened bidding for the renovation of a cluster of 3 riverfront buildings. Preliminary qualification materials are due in 10 days. If we miss this round, there won't be another opportunity for 2 years. Emmett didn't pick up the file. Give it to the investment division. I did. But this bid needs your signature on the capacity commitment, and that signature can't be delegated. He paused, then added in that same gentle voice. You're digging through dusty boxes from before anyone used tablets. I understand. Everyone new to authority goes through a period when they want to know everything. But you should remember that this company survives on what comes next, not on what has already been boxed away. Emmett looked down at the inventory on his desk, then at the bid file beside it. Do you know how many boxes are down there, Mr. Hollis? I haven't counted. 412, Emmett said. Hollis smiled and left. Emmett remained where he was. And this time, the vague feeling from the day before didn't pass as quickly as it had the first time. It stayed long enough for him to recognize one small thing, that in their last two conversations, every time he mentioned that archive, Hollis Bramwell had handed him something that needed to be signed urgently. Josie worked in a way that was very slow and very old, a way no software could teach. She built her tables by hand. With every records box she opened, she pulled out the pages bearing contractor codes, wrote each code in one column, the property code in the next, and the date in a third. By the 9th box, she had 3 pages crowded with rows of letters and numbers that anyone glancing at them might have mistaken for license plate numbers. She did it for one simple reason. The Kavanagh Group's procurement files did not name buildings, they named only codes, and she knew that when people replaced names with codes, the easiest thing to lose was memory. By Friday evening, she noticed one contractor code appearing again and again. Ridgeline Systems. It appeared in 7 different boxes, at dates separated by years, and it always came with the same kind of document, an equipment replacement report following a routine inspection. She traced that code back to the vendor cross-reference list. There, Ridgeline Systems was listed beneath a larger heading, one that named the primary contracting entity, and the primary contracting entity was not the Kavanagh Group. It was another name, Northline Property Holdings. Josie had never heard the name before. She pulled out the legal records box and began to search. It took nearly an hour. Northline Property Holdings was a subsidiary established to manage rental buildings in the northern part of the city, operating for roughly 12 years before it was dissolved. She read the dissolution date, then she read it again. She set the paper on the metal desk and sat still for nearly a minute. The company had dissolved in the 2nd month after the winter, when she was 20 years old. She pulled the property index toward her. Northline had managed 14 buildings. The list contained only codes. She went down each line, cross-checking it against the address list attached in the final appendix, and her finger stopped at the 9th entry. She did not need to read the whole address. She had traveled there on the 32nd bus for 3 straight weeks, carrying a lunchbox wrapped in a towel to keep it warm, getting off at the stop near the intersection, walking the remaining distance, and ringing the back doorbell because the front entrance was locked after 9 at night. She knew the sidewalk in front of that building had a crack shaped like a V that she always stepped around. She knew the basement hallway light flickered. She knew where her father used to leave his coat. The building where her father had worked for 19 years, the building he had not escaped from, belonged to a subsidiary of the Kavanagh Group, the same group whose gray uniform she had worn for 7 years, the same group that had paid her to fold towels, work nights, calm frightened guests, repair coffee machines, and never miss a shift. The same group whose monthly wages had gone straight into the envelope she placed on the kitchen table for her mother, month after month, to pay the debt. Josie sat there for a long time. She did not cry. She did something else, the thing she had always done whenever the ground beneath her began to tilt. She checked again. She took the sheet with the property code and matched it to the address appendix a 2nd time. It was right. She reopened the legal file and checked the names of Northline's founding shareholders. Right again. She found the asset transfer report from after the company was dissolved, and saw that 13 buildings had been transferred back to the parent company, while the 14th had not, because there was nothing left in the 14th building to transfer. She set that paper down last. Beyond the small window of the records room, the city had dimmed its lights long ago. She thought of that morning in the service lobby, of sliding half an egg sandwich into the middle of the table, of saying so calmly that the person who signed last was always the first person blamed, and of the man sitting across from her who had picked up that half of the sandwich and eaten it. Did he know? The question settled in the middle of her chest and would not leave. She opened the blue leather notebook. On the unfinished page was still the line she had written during the technical review the day before. She studied her own handwriting for a moment, then turned back toward the first pages. The pages yellowed along the edges. The pages she had written when she had not yet known how to write neatly. This notebook had belonged to her father. She had only continued writing in it. Josie closed the notebook and placed both hands on its worn leather cover. She did not call her mother. She did not call anyone. She pulled the 10th records box closer, lifted the lid, and kept writing codes in the first column, because over the past 7 years she had learned that there were nights when the only thing that kept a person standing upright was finishing the work left unfinished. When the first cleaning woman opened the door to the 31st floor the next morning, Josie Malloy was still sitting there, the stack of towels beneath her desk flattened down, and before her lay 11 hand-ruled pages that no one else in that building knew she had built over the course of one long night. Josie went down to the Ardmore Hotel late that afternoon without changing out of her uniform, and without telling anyone first, and she found Warren Pike in the mechanical room, sitting with a pressure log in front of him. He looked up, saw her, and the smile that had only begun to rise faded away. "What are you doing down here? Is something wrong upstairs?" "Mr. Warren," she said, "how long did you work at the North Line building in the northern part of the city?" He set his pen down. It rolled once across the log sheet and stopped at the edge. He didn't ask where she had heard that name. He didn't tell her she was mistaken. He only reached back and switched off the ventilation fan running behind him, and suddenly the room was so quiet they could hear water moving through the pipes. 16 years, he said. Josie pulled out a chair and sat down. "You knew my father. I knew your father. You worked the same shift as him. I worked the same shift as him for the last 8 years. She said nothing more. She let the silence settle between them, and Warren Pike, the man who had taught her how to read electrical diagrams, who had pressed a ring of technical keys into her hand, who had filed 3 separate requests to transfer her into the technical department, sat looking at his hands for a long time before he began to speak. "About 4 months before that winter, your father came to see me. He had some papers with him. He said there was something wrong with the new batch of sensors installed in the building. He said he had tested them 3 times, and whenever the boiler ran for a long stretch, they responded more slowly. Once, they were so slow, he had to stand there and count. He had written it all down." Josie sat quietly. "I told him to file a report and send it upstairs. He did. No one answered. He did it a second time. Still no one answered." Warren paused. Then he wrote a letter. "Who was the letter for?" "He wasn't sending it to management anymore. He said that if he sent it upward, it would only stop at the first desk it reached. He wrote directly to the person who had just taken over the group, the young man who had only recently stepped in. He thought someone new wouldn't have anything to hide yet." Josie folded her hands together in her lap. "He gave the letter to me," Warren said. "Back then, I was the only one on our crew whose name was on the list of people allowed to go to quarterly meetings at the main building. He asked me to take it upstairs. He told me to put it directly in the man's hand, not drop it into the internal mail." He rubbed a hand over his face, then lowered it again. "I didn't deliver it." Josie didn't ask why. She only looked at him. "I was 51 then," Warren said, and his voice remained steady, only slower than before. "My wife had just had her second surgery. We still had 8 years left on the mortgage. I took that envelope up to the main building, sat in the hallway outside the meeting room for nearly 40 minutes, and thought about whether I'd still have a job there the following week if I handed it over. Then I brought it back. I put it in the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath the fuse box. I told myself I would leave it there for now and think about it the next week." "Then winter came," Josie said. "Then winter came." Neither of them spoke for a very long time. Josie looked down at the patch of concrete between her feet, both resting side by side in matching shoes, so still that no one looking at them could tell which one was real. "After that, they transferred me here," Warren continued. "Human Resources called it a workforce reassignment. Same pay, a title that sounded better, a newer hotel, cleaner, air-conditioned. So I went. It took me years to understand they hadn't rewarded me. They had only moved me away from the place where someone might come asking questions." He looked up at her. "You came to work here when you were 21. I saw your name on the new employee list. I knew right away who you were." Josie remained silent. "I didn't ask for you to be transferred to the technical department because I was fond of you," Warren said. "I was fond of you. That part is true. But the reason I filed those 3 requests, the reason I gave you those keys, the reason I've spent 7 years standing behind you, is because every time I saw you walk down this hallway, I remembered that bottom drawer." He stopped. "I haven't slept, Josie. Not for 7 years." Josie sat there for a long time. There were so many words in her mind, and she let every one of them pass through her, one by one, until only a single question remained. "Where is the letter now?" Warren looked at her. "I gave it back." "Gave it back to who?" "To you." She didn't understand. He stood, walked to the steel cabinet in the corner of the room, but he didn't open it. He only stood there with his back to her. "The day you got out of the hospital, your mother came here to collect your father's belongings. They had put them in a cardboard box. There was a coat, a drinking mug, a ceramic cup, and the notebook he always wrote in. I was the one who sealed that box." He turned back toward her. "I took the letter out of the drawer. I didn't dare hand it directly to your mother, because then I would have had to explain, and I couldn't explain it. I slipped it into the sealed inner pocket of the back cover, behind the final blank pages. Then I put the notebook in the box. Josie sat still in the chair inside the mechanical room, and one of her hands had risen on its own to press against the place beneath her arm where the blue leather notebook rested every day for 7 years, traveling through every hallway, every night shift, every bus stop, and never once had she turned to its final page. Josie did not open the notebook that night. She held it in her hands all the way from the mechanical room up to the lobby, her thumb resting along the edge of the paper where the final pages began, and she stopped twice on 2 different stair landings. Both times, she kept walking. There were things a person needed to choose the right place to open, and the middle of a basement hallway was not that place. She took the night shift that evening for someone who had called out because her child was sick. Ruth Delacroix asked whether she was all right. Josie said she was, and Ruth looked at her for exactly 3 seconds before saying she would save her a piece of cake. The hotel was quiet that night. A conference group had checked out that afternoon, and on the 14th floor, only 9 rooms remained occupied, all of them single guests, with no families and no children on the occupancy list. Later, when she sat down to write out the entire sequence of events, that was the first line Josie put on paper, before she even wrote her own name. It began with a smell. She was sitting at the desk when she caught it drifting down through the ventilation ducts. A sharp, scorched smell. Not cigarette smoke. Not food. She looked at the monitoring screen. Everything appeared normal. The East Wing showed not a single alert. She stood up, went toward the elevator, then changed her mind and took the stairs. By the 13th floor landing, she no longer needed to smell for it. Smoke had already crept down beneath the gap of the 14th floor fire door, a thin pale gray layer crawling along the floor like spilled water. She pushed the door open. The East Wing hallway lay under a murky kind of light. The ceiling lamps were still on, but their light did not seem to reach anywhere. At the far end of the hall, near the floor laundry room, smoke was pushing out more thickly, and a small crackling sound came from within it. Josie looked up at the detector mounted on the ceiling, the white circle directly beneath the air return vent, the position she had pointed out during the technical review and been dismissed for. It was silent. The light on its body was still green. Not one alarm was sounding anywhere in the East Wing. She stood there for exactly 2 breaths. Then she pulled out her radio. She called the front desk, gave the floor number, gave the location, said clearly that there was smoke and the system had not activated, told them to call the fire department immediately and trigger the alarm manually from the central panel. She heard the young desk clerk repeat every word back to her, his voice breaking on the last one. Then she shut off the radio. The ring of keys Warren had given her hung from her belt. She had worn it for weeks and had never once used a single key. At that moment, there was no Ardmore Hotel floor plan in her mind. What rose before her was another page, a page from the blue leather notebook where her father had drawn, by hand, a rough sketch of how an old building's electrical system was wired, the principle he had explained to her again and again when she had still sat eating dinner in his mechanical room, that when something went wrong, the first thing you did was not run, but cut off what was feeding it. She followed that order exactly. She used the key without a plastic tag to unlock the main circuit breaker box and cut the power. Then she used the tagged key to open the manual valve for the East Wing fire suppression system. Then she turned back toward the hallway. The ceiling lights had gone out. Only the green exit lights along the baseboards remained, blurred into long streaks in the smoke. Josie began with the nearest room. She knocked, called out the room number, and waited. The door opened. She told the person inside exactly 3 things. Stay low, follow me, don't turn back for your belongings. She led them toward the west stairwell at the other end of the hallway, away from where the smoke was pouring out. Then she returned for the next room. She did that 8 times. In the 4th room, a man refused to leave because he had forgotten his passport, and Josie told him, in a voice so calm that it surprised even her, "The embassy can replace your passport in 4 days, but the person standing here right now cannot be replaced by anyone." He left. In the 7th room, 2 guests were sleeping heavily, and she had to knock for nearly a minute. In the 8th room, a woman opened the door already holding her bag, and she told Josie that she had smelled it earlier but, because she had not heard an alarm, thought she had imagined it. Josie did not answer that. She only led the woman to the stairs. When the final group had passed through the west fire door, and the metal handrail was crowded with gripping hands, Josie stopped in the doorway and counted. She counted against the list of 9 rooms she had memorized at the beginning of her shift. 8. She counted again. Still 8. Then she remembered the 9th room, the last room in the hallway, at the deepest end, closest to the smoke. The elderly man had checked in that afternoon with a 4-legged walker, and had asked her at the front desk whether the elevators broke down often. Josie let go of the fire door and turned back toward the hallway. The East Wing corridor was different when she went back than it had been when she left. The smoke had grown thicker and dropped lower, and Josie had to move bent over, one hand following the wall because the exit lights along the baseboards were now only blurred spots. She counted doors by touch rather than by sight. 3 doors, 4 doors. When she reached the last one, she struck it with the full of her palm and called out the room number. Something fell inside. Then the door opened. The elderly man stood there gripping his walker, his coat already on but buttoned crookedly, and the first thing he said was in the voice of someone trying to sound calmer than he was, that he had heard people running in the hallway but had not heard an alarm. So he had waited because he thought that if there really was an emergency, someone would have sounded one. "I know," Josie said. "Come with me. This walker is very slow." "That's all right. I'm slow too." She walked half a step ahead of him, one hand holding his elbow, the other following the wall. The walker struck the baseboard several times, and each time the old man stopped to apologize, and each time Josie told him to keep moving. She talked the whole way, not to reassure him, but so he would know where she was inside the smoke. She asked where he had come from, and he said Milwaukee. She asked what had brought him to Chicago, and he said he was there for his granddaughter's wedding, and she told him that meant he had to keep that coat clean. They crossed the whole East Wing hallway in the amount of time that would normally have taken Josie less than a minute. When the west fire door closed behind them, the air in the stairwell was cleaner, and the old man leaned against the wall to breathe. Josie looked down at the walker, then down at the stairs. "Leave the walker here," she said. "I'll stay on your left. Hold the railing with your right hand. 1 step at a time, no rushing." That was how they went down. 13th floor, 12th floor. At every landing, they paused for one breath. And on the 11th floor, the old man asked whether she was tired, and Josie said she was looking forward to getting downstairs so she could sit down. By the 10th floor, she began to feel that something was wrong on her left side. The locking mechanism on her prosthetic leg had slipped out of its groove twice that night, and both times she had managed to push it back in by shifting her weight the right way. At the 9th floor landing, she tried a 3rd time, and it would not go back in. She tried again. It still would not lock. The old man stopped on the top step. "Are you all right? Please stay right there for a moment." Josie sat down on the landing. She reached beneath the leg of her uniform pants, found the strap worn so thin it was held together by only a few threads, and unfastened it. The prosthetic leg came away from her. She set it on the landing floor beside the wall, directly beneath the green exit light. Then she gripped the railing and stood on her right leg. "Stay only half a step ahead of me," she said. "Hold on tightly. Young lady, you left your... I'll come back for it. Please keep moving." They went down another 9 floors that way. Josie moved by the railing, both hands clenched around the metal bar, her right foot touching down first, and the rest of her following, 1 step at a time, and she counted the steps aloud, so the old man would know how much farther they had to go. On the 7th floor, they met the first 2 firefighters coming up. On the 3rd floor, someone else came to help the old man. Josie told them that every remaining room had been checked, gave them the floor number, gave them the location of the laundry room, told them the power to that area had been shut off and the east wing valve had been opened. And she said every one of those things before she let anyone take hold of her arm. 9 occupied rooms, 9 people out. Not one person had died. Dawn was beginning to break when Emmett Kavanaugh arrived. Fire engines stood across the street, their rotating red lights flashing against the building's glass. And inside the lobby, radio voices overlapped one another. He did not stop in the lobby. He asked one of the commanders, heard 3 words, "West stairwell," and went straight into the stairwell and began climbing. He passed the 3rd floor, the 5th floor, the 7th floor. There were several fire hoses stretched across the steps there, and he had to step over them. When he reached the 9th floor landing, he stopped. The prosthetic leg lay close to the wall beneath the green exit light that was still glowing. The plastic around the socket had turned the color of old ivory. Its frayed strap lay loose across the floor to one side. Emmett Kavanaugh stood on the 9th floor landing for a long time, one hand resting on the railing, looking down at that prosthetic leg before he saw her. The preliminary report was issued before lunch the next day. It was 2 pages long, and Josie read it at home, seated on a kitchen chair with her prosthetic leg leaning against the table. The first page described the time of discovery, the affected area, and the response measures taken. The second contained the preliminary finding, which stated that the initial cause had been identified as a hotel guest operating a personal electrical device in a prohibited area. She read that part 3 times. Nowhere in those 2 pages was her name. There was not one line stating that the East Wing fire alarm system had failed to activate. Not one line stating that the alarm had needed to be triggered manually from the central panel. There was only one sentence at the end, saying that the employee on duty had assisted in directing guests to move according to procedure. Adelaide Ferris called her in that afternoon. She had a particular way of making a meeting look like concern. She poured water, asked whether Josie had been sleeping, said the company would cover all medical expenses, and consider providing a replacement mobility device as soon as possible. Then she slid a sheet of paper across the desk. "This is your personal statement. Please read it and sign it for me." Josie read it. The statement had already been prepared from beginning to end. In the middle was a sentence saying that she had independently operated the East Wing electrical and fire suppression systems in a situation where the cause had not yet been clearly identified. At the end was a sentence saying that she confirmed the preliminary report was complete and accurate. She set the paper down. "I'm not signing this." Adelaide's expression did not change. "Miss Malloy, this is standard procedure. It protects you as well. It says I acted on my own. Mr. Warren gave me those keys weeks ago, and it's recorded in the handover log. And I can't confirm that last part, because the report says nothing about the East Wing system being silent. That belongs to the technical assessment. There will be a separate report." "Will my name be in that separate report?" Adelaide did not answer. She drew the paper back toward herself. "Think about it. I'll leave it here until the end of the week." "I'll sign that I received it," Josie said. "I won't sign that it's true." The next morning, her keycard would not open the door to the 31st floor. She tried twice, then stood there looking at the red light blinking on the card reader. By noon, a notice had arrived in her internal mailbox. A written warning concerning statements and actions outside her assigned authority, to be placed in her personnel file. She printed it, folded it into quarters, and tucked it into the blue leather notebook. Emmett called her upstairs late that afternoon. He was not sitting behind his desk. He sat in the chair beside it, with a folder lying face down on the table between them. "I can restore your keycard in 5 minutes," he said. "I can remove that warning from your file with 1 phone call." "I haven't done either." "Why?" "Because once I do, they'll change tactics, and I'll lose their trail." Josie nodded. She understood that logic. She sat down. "I have something I need to tell you too," she said, "about the contractor codes." Emmett raised one hand, very slightly, and she stopped. "Let me speak first," he said. "I've been holding this for 7 days. If I let you finish, I'll have one more reason to stay silent, and I don't want another reason." He turned the folder over. He did not slide it toward her. He only opened it to the last page and held it there. "There is a file in the archive approving a switch in fire alarm equipment suppliers," he said. "The new equipment costs 37% less. In the attached specifications, there is a note saying the devices respond slowly in high humidity and temperatures above the threshold, and recommending that they not be used in areas near steam systems." Josie sat very still. "That file applied to 27 properties," Emmett said. "It was approved in the summer when I was 26, 3 weeks after my father died. They put 140 pages on my desk in a single afternoon and told me the people beneath me had reviewed everything, that my signature was only the last formality." He turned the folder toward her. "I signed all 140 pages. I did not read a single one. There was no sound in the room. The city was moving through its evening rush below them, but at that height, no one could hear it. I did not know which properties they were," Emmett said. "The file listed only codes. I have people tracing every code now, but I know that batch of equipment was installed somewhere in this system for years. And I know there was not a single alarm in the east wing of the Ardmore building the night before last." Josie looked down at the blue leather notebook in her lap, the notebook holding a sheet of paper folded into quarters in its middle, and an unopened letter in its final pages. She thought of the address appendix, the sidewalk with the V-shaped crack, the 30-second bus route, the lunchbox wrapped in a towel to keep it warm. She did not tell him the name Northline. She did not tell him about the 9th line on the list of 14 buildings. She stood, tucked the notebook beneath her arm, walked to the door, and closed it behind her, leaving Emmett Kavanagh alone with the page still open on the table. Josie came back to the 3rd-floor apartment while her mother was still at the laundry, and she did not turn on the living room light. She went straight into the kitchen, sat down, and placed the blue leather notebook on the table. She still had not opened it to the final pages. She thought she had come home to open it, but once she sat there, she understood she could not. Not yet. Not at this moment. Her mother had to be there. While she waited, She did what she always did whenever too many things were piled on top of one another in her mind. She cleaned. She wiped down the table, straightened the stack of bills held in the metal clip beside the stove, then pulled open the bottom drawer to put away some insurance papers. The drawer was too full. She had to take everything out before it would close again. At the very bottom, beneath an envelope of old photographs and a stack of medical records, was a pale yellow envelope, faded around the edges. Josie opened it. Inside was a 4-page agreement. She read it from the beginning. The first page confirmed the identity of the recipient, Colleen Malloy. The second listed the expenses the paying party agreed to cover, all inpatient treatment costs, surgical costs, rehabilitation costs, and the cost of making and fitting her first mobility device. The third page contained the recipient's commitments. One clause stated that the recipient agreed not to file a complaint, provide information to the press, take part in any legal proceeding connected to the incident at a property belonging to Northline Property Holdings, or make any public statement about the cause of that incident. The fourth page bore 2 signatures. One was her mother's handwriting, which Josie recognized at once, the capital C larger than usual, the way it always was whenever her mother signed something that made her hands shake. The other signature belonged to the paying party, and beneath it was a full name in print, Hollis Bramwell. Josie set the 4 pages on the table, aligned their edges, then sat quietly. She remained there until she heard a key in the door. Colleen came inside, the smell of steam and fabric softener still clinging to her clothes, and she saw the pale yellow envelope on the table before she had time to remove her coat. She stopped in the middle of the kitchen. "You found it?" "Yes." Colleen took off her coat, hung it over the back of a chair, then sat down across from her daughter. She did not reach for the agreement. She only looked at it. "Ask me," she said. "I'll answer. For 7 years, I've sent money home to you every month." "Yes." "To pay off the hospital debt." "Yes." "Did that debt ever exist, Mom?" Colleen was silent for a long time. Then she said, "No." Josie nodded. She did not ask another question. Colleen went on by herself. "You were in there for 41 days. I sat outside that room in the hallway and counted every day. On the 9th day, someone from the hospital called me out to talk about the costs. I brought my savings book and my pay stub. They picked them up, looked at them, then set them down. They didn't say anything, but I saw the way they put those papers back on the table, and I understood." She turned her wedding ring once around her finger. "On the 12th day, he came. He was well-dressed, soft-spoken, and he called me Mrs. Malloy instead of calling me sister. He said the company was deeply sorry for what had happened. He said the company wanted to take care of you properly, without any limit on the amount." She paused. "Then he gave me those 4 pages. Did you read them?" "I read every word. I read them twice." Colleen looked up at her daughter. "I knew what the 3rd page said, Josie. I knew that signing it meant I was selling away the right to clear your father's name. I understood that very clearly. I'm not a fool." Josie said nothing. "I sat in that hospital hallway with those 4 pages in my lap, and I thought about only 2 things. First, your father was already gone, and no matter how far I took a lawsuit, he would not stand up again. Second, you were still in there. You were 20 years old. You had another 60 years to live with that leg." She laid both hands flat on the table. "I chose you." Josie looked at her mother's hands that had spent 40 years lifting wet clothes out of industrial washing machines, and she saw them trembling very slightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because if I had, you would have given it back," Colleen said. "You would have given back that leg, demanded a lawsuit, worked 2 shifts to hire a lawyer, and you would have lost. They had an entire building full of lawyers, and all we had was a savings book." She stopped, and there was one more reason. "I'm ashamed to say it, but I will. Tell me. The first month you started working, you came home and put an envelope on this table. You said you were helping me pay the debt. I meant to tell you that very day." Colleen let out a breath. "But you had only just smiled again for the first time, after nearly a year. You smiled because you felt you were helping our family. I looked at your face then, and I could not tell you." She lowered her head. "Then the next month, you put another envelope on the table. Then the month after that. Every month, I pushed it back another month, and that was how 7 years passed." She looked up again, her eyes red but unshed. "I chose you, Josie. I'm not asking you to understand. I only want you to know that I chose, and every day of those 7 years, I chose you all over again." No one said anything else in the kitchen. Josie stood, walked around the edge of the table, and sat in the chair beside her mother. She did not hug her. She placed her hand over her mother's hand, and they sat there that way, in front of 4 faded pages and a blue leather notebook still unopened to its final page. For 3 days after that, Josie and Emmett did not speak a single word to each other. She still came to the 31st floor, because her keycard worked again, and he still remained in his office, and they both knew the other was only a few feet away. Neither of them crossed that distance. On Tuesday evening, Josie stayed late after her shift. She brought together everything she had gathered over the past weeks, the 4-page agreement she had found in her mother's drawer, and the 11 hand-ruled pages of contractor cross-references she had mapped out during her long night in the records room. She copied them all, bound them neatly into a single hard folder, tucked the blue leather notebook beneath her arm, and went down to the garage to catch the bus. The second basement level was nearly empty. She had taken perhaps 20 steps when the row of lights behind her went out. She stopped. There was no sound of a switch. The light simply vanished, one row and then the next, moving toward her like a door closing from far away. Josie did not turn around. She listened. There were footsteps. Not one person. 3. They were not in a hurry. That was the detail that sent cold along her spine. They were not in a hurry at all. She kept walking, holding the same pace, calculating in her head. The stairwell exit was ahead, about 130 feet away. Too far. The rolling door to the street was on her left, farther still, but the gray door was 15 steps away. The door marked technical room, the door her ring of keys could open. The third row of lights went out. A voice spoke behind her, not loud, almost polite. "Miss Malloy, we only need the folder." Josie took 3 more steps, then moved fully to the left. "Stop." She did not stop. The footsteps changed rhythm. Now they were rushing. 10 steps. She pulled the keys from the hook at her belt, searching by touch rather than sight for the plastic tag with the rough edge. 7 steps. They were running now. 4 steps. She put the key into the lock. It went in on the first try. She pushed open the door, slipped inside, and slammed it shut just as something struck the outside of it. She turned the deadbolt. It was completely dark inside. She did not look for the light switch. She did not need it. She had studied this building's plans for 3 straight weeks, and she knew the electrical panel was on the wall to the right, 2 steps from the door, at shoulder height. She found its cover, opened it, and ran her fingers down to the bottom row of breakers, the row with one lever longer than the others. The alarm breaker for the entire garage. She pulled it. The sirens began howling from all 4 corners of the basement at once. The emergency lights came on, stark white. And at the street exit, the security gate began to lower, slow and steady, with its warning bell repeating over and over. Outside the gray door, the footsteps changed direction. Then they ran, but the gate was already halfway down, and the stairwell had cameras on every landing, and all those 3 men could do over the next 40 seconds was run toward an exit that was closing by itself. Emmett arrived less than 10 minutes later. He came with Cormac and 2 members of the security team. And by the time he reached the basement, security had all 3 men detained in a corner of the garage beneath the pale emergency lights. He went straight to the nearest one. He did not say a word. He seized the man by the collar with both hands and drove him against a concrete pillar. Cormac stepped forward, then stopped. In 7 years of working beside Emmett Kavanagh, he had never seen this. Emmett's face was not red. He did not shout. That was what made it frightening. "Who told you?" he said. The man did not answer. Emmett's hands tightened, and he leaned his whole body forward for one single beat. Then a hand came to rest on his arm. "Mr. Kavanagh." Josie stood right beside him. She was still holding the hard folder, the notebook tucked beneath her arm, her hair fallen loose to one side, and her voice was completely calm. "Let him go." Emmett did not turn around. "Do you know why they came down here?" "Yes." "Then step aside. Please listen to me first." She pulled his arm down, not hard, only enough. "There is a 4-page settlement in this folder, along with 11 pages of evidence I drew by hand line by line," she said. "If you hit him here, tomorrow all anyone will talk about is your temper. No one will look at the truth on these pages. 7 years of my father's memory and my life will mean nothing, all because of 3 seconds of your anger." Emmett stood still. Then he let go. He stepped back, straightened his cuff, and turned toward Cormac. "Call the police," he said, "and tell them to question Hollis Bramwell's chief of security, Gareth Sloan." That night, Emmett walked Josie all the way to the door of her 3rd-floor apartment, and when she unlocked it, he was still standing on the stair landing with both hands in his pockets, like a man who did not know how far he was allowed to come. "Come in," she said. Is Mrs. Colleen home? My mother's working the night shift. Come in. I'm not going to stand out in the hallway talking. Her kitchen was small, only large enough for a 4-seat table, and Emmett had to turn sideways to get between the table and the refrigerator. He opened the refrigerator, stood looking inside for a moment, then took off his coat, draped it over the back of a chair, and rolled up his sleeves. You have eggs, onions, and a box of noodles. What are you doing? I'm making the only thing I know how to make. He set a pan on the stove, and Josie sat at the table watching him cook, and it turned out that the man cooked exactly the way he did everything else, slowly, neatly, without a single unnecessary movement. Who taught you? My grandmother. She said every man in this family knew how to sign his name, but none of them knew how to take care of his own dinner, and that was dangerous. Dangerous? Because a person who can't take care of his own dinner always has to depend on somebody else. There was a knock at the door. Josie got up to answer it, and Emmett heard a child say something very quickly, then heard her laugh. She came back into the kitchen with a little boy clinging close behind her Paloma's 7-year-old son, Micah, with curly hair and oversized slippers, and right behind him was his mother, standing in the doorway with a pot in her arms. Paloma's out of salt, Josie said. Hello, sir, the boy said. Hello. Emmett took the salt shaker from the shelf and handed it to him. The boy accepted it, but he did not leave right away. He stood there looking at the pan on the stove. What are you cooking, sir? Egg noodles. Are you cooking for Miss Josie? Yes. The boy nodded with great seriousness, then looked up and asked in the blunt voice only children possess, Are you a good person, sir? At the doorway, Paloma gave a little cry and called the boy's name. Josie laughed. Emmett turned off the stove, faced him, and did not smile. He bent down slightly until he was at the boy's level, and he answered honestly. I'm not sure, he said. I've done some things that weren't very good. I'm trying to make them right. The boy considered that answer far more seriously than adults usually believed children could. Can you fix them? I don't know yet. I'm trying. Then you should keep trying, the boy said, then hugged the salt shaker to his chest and ran back to the door. Paloma thanked him 3 times in a row, led her son away, and the door closed, leaving only the faint simmer of the noodles in the kitchen. He asks everyone that question, Josie said. He even asked the mailman. What do you tell him? I told him I didn't know. He said I should keep trying then. Emmett ladled the noodles into 2 bowls and set them on the table. They ate without speaking for a while. Outside the window, a train went by, and the kitchen ceiling light flickered slightly each time it passed. Over the past 3 days, I nearly called you 6 times, Emmett said. Why didn't you? Because I didn't know how to begin. An apology would have been too small. An explanation would have sounded like an excuse. Josie set down her fork. Do you know what made me walk away that day? The signature. Not the signature, she said. I sat there knowing something you didn't know. I knew it, and I didn't tell you. I got up and left, and while I was riding down in the elevator, I realized I had done exactly what people had been doing to me for 7 years. I held a piece of paper in my hand and let someone else keep walking in the dark. Emmett said nothing. I hate that feeling, she said. I hated it so much that when I got home, I had to clean the kitchen. She stood, went into the next room, and came back holding the blue leather notebook. She placed it on the table between their bowls and rested her palm on its cover. This belonged to my father, she said. I only kept writing in it. For 7 years, I've carried it with me every day. I took it to work, to school, even to doctor's appointments. I've filled almost all of it. I know. I saw it in the conference room. You haven't seen all of it. Josie sat down. 3 days ago, Mr. Warren told me something. He said that when they boxed up my father's belongings, he put something inside this notebook. He tucked it into the last pages, where the paper was still blank. Emmett looked at the notebook. Have you opened it? No. Why not? Because I already know what it is, she said, and because it wasn't written for me. She pushed the notebook across the table toward him. My father wrote a letter. He didn't send it to management. He said if he sent it upward, it would only stop at the first desk. He wrote directly to the person who had just taken over the company back then, the young man who had only just come into power. He thought a new person would have nothing to hide. Emmett rested one hand on the worn leather cover. He did not lift it right away. Mr. Warren accepted the letter for delivery. He sat outside the conference room for 40 minutes, then took it home and put it in a drawer. Josie looked at him. Turned to the last page. Emmett unfolded the yellowed paper under the dim kitchen light, reading every word in silence as the midnight train passed outside. 2 days later, that same letter lay open at the center of the highest room in the building. The boardroom was on the top floor, with a long wooden table and 11 seats, and Eileen Kavanagh sat at its head with both hands folded one over the other. Hollis Bramwell spoke first. He used no slides, held no papers, only stood beside his chair and spoke in the calm, measured voice that had persuaded this room for 3 generations. He said that over the past few weeks, the head of the company had halted 3 contractor agreements, lost a city pre-qualification bid, and spent most of his time in a basement archive. He said he understood that everyone sometimes wanted to repair the past, but this company was not a place for anyone to heal. He said that a night shift employee had been brought to the 31st floor without going through any hiring process, and that, if he might speak plainly, that was no longer management, that was emotion. Then he sat down. Emmett did not rise. He only said one sentence. "Please ask Miss Malloy to come in." The door opened. Josie entered, her first 3 steps slightly uneven. Then, finding their rhythm on the 4th, she carried a canvas bag and a notebook. She walked to the far end of the table, set down the bag, and took out her old prosthetic leg. She placed it on the polished wood. The sound of plastic against the table rang dry and clear through the silent room, and no one seated there moved. The plastic socket had yellowed to ivory. Its frayed strap lay loose at one side. "This was left on the 9th floor landing," she said. "I brought it up here because some of you have never had to look at it." She placed 2 sheets of paper on the table. The first is the preliminary report from that night. The second is the system log from the same night, printed directly from the server before anyone handled it. These 2 documents do not match in one place. Please read them yourselves. I will not speak for them. Papers turned. Hollis remained still, his hands resting on the table. Josie opened the blue leather notebook to its final page and took out a sheet of paper, folded into quarters and yellowed along the creases. "This is the one I have to read," she said, "because the man who wrote it cannot read it anymore." She unfolded the page. "To the new owner. My name is Desmond Malloy. I have worked electrical maintenance in the North Building for 19 years. I do not know how to write a letter like this, so I will write plainly. The new batch of fire sensors installed here has a problem. When the boiler runs for a long time, they respond slowly. I tested them 3 times. On the longest test, I stood there counting for almost a full minute before they sounded. 1 minute is a long time. In 1 minute, smoke could travel the length of this entire hallway. I wrote 2 reports and sent them upstairs. No one answered. I do not blame anyone. I know you receive a great deal of paperwork every day, but you are new. They told me you had only just taken over, so I thought, perhaps you did not know anyone here yet, and perhaps you did not have to protect anyone's reputation. I am not asking for anything for myself. I work nights. I earn enough to live on, and my daughter is grown. I only ask that you send someone down to test that batch of sensors again. Just test them. If I am wrong, I will apologize to you. I will not write another letter." Josie paused. She turned the paper over. Only 2 lines remained. "I do not think I am wrong. I have done this work for 19 years, sir. Anything about to fail has a sound of its own." She folded the letter again. "My father did not sign his name at the end. He stopped writing there, then handed it to someone else to bring upstairs. This letter never reached anyone's desk." She placed it beside the prosthetic leg. 4 months later, that batch of sensors really did respond too slowly. Then someone wrote an 11-page conclusion, and on the final page, they listed the cause as operator error by the technician on duty. There was only 1 technician on duty in that building that night. While everyone in the room sat stunned by her words, Hollis Bramwell slipped silently out the back door. 31 floors below in the basement, the freight elevator doors opened. Hollis stepped out. He was not in a hurry. He walked down the corridor with the steady gait of a man going somewhere he had gone many times before. He turned left and came to the server room door. He held his badge to the reader. The light turned red. He tried again. Still red. The server room door opened from the inside. Cormac Doyle stood there with 3 members of the technical team behind him, and on the table lay a data preservation order signed the night before by the company's general counsel and Emmett Kavanagh. Hollis stood still before the open door. He said nothing to Cormac. He only turned his head and looked down the basement corridor, the corridor he had walked through countless times over 30 years, and for the first time, it led nowhere. No one in the room spoke. Eileen Kavanagh stared at the yellowed letter on the table for a long time, and at some point, her hands had come apart. Emmett stood. "Does Mr. Bramwell have anything to say?" he asked. Then he looked down at the empty chair to his right. the chair that had been empty since the middle of the letter, and he did not look surprised at all. Eileen Kavanagh rose before anyone could answer Emmett's question. She did not look toward the empty chair. She looked at the yellowed letter lying beside the prosthetic leg on the wooden table. Mr. Bramwell was not the one who ordered that file closed, she said. The whole room turned toward her. I was the one who gave that order. Emmett turned to face her. She continued, slowly, without trying to avoid it. 4 months after that summer when you signed 140 pages, they placed the preliminary investigation report on my desk. It contained a line stating that the batch of sensors was unsuitable for an area near the steam system, and at the end of the approval file was your signature. She placed one hand on the table. You were only 26. Your father had just died. A 3-generation corporation rested on the shoulders of a child who did not yet know what he was signing his name to. If that file had been opened, no one would have asked who had placed those papers in front of you. They would have looked at the final line and read the name written there. She looked at Josie. So I closed it. I thought I was saving my grandson. I did not think that on the other side of that piece of paper was a man named Desmond Malloy and a 20-year-old girl. She sat down. Emmett stood still for a long time. Then he told the entire room that he would disclose everything to the investigators, including the part that belonged to him, and he said it knowing exactly what it meant. The vote was held that same afternoon, 7-4. The case was reopened. In the months that followed, everything moved through the course of paperwork, slowly and without noise. Hollis Bramwell was prosecuted for falsifying documents and bribing witnesses. Adelaide Ferris was suspended, then disclosed the entire process used to alter the personnel records. Gareth Sloan was charged in the same case. Eileen withdrew from the board and submitted her own statement. Emmett Kavanagh accepted civil liability, paid compensation, and was barred from holding an executive position in the building safety field for a long time. He lost the power he had once possessed, and he did not appeal a single line. The old 11-page conclusion was overturned. In the new report, the section on cause no longer contained the sentence claiming operator error by the technician on duty. On the day that document arrived, Colleen Malloy was sitting in the kitchen. She read it once from beginning to end, then read it again, then set it on the table and sat very still for a long time, with both hands covering her face. Josie sat beside her mother and said nothing at all, just as they had sat together on the night they faced those 4 faded pages. Warren Pike submitted his own statement before anyone called him. He finished out that year, then retired, and before he left, he handed over the entire technical archive of the Ardmore Hotel to its new person in charge. That person was Josephine Malloy, building safety coordinator. She had a new prosthetic leg, fitted precisely to her measurements, with straps that held firm. The first thing she approved in that role was a fund to support medical equipment and mobility assistance devices for employees throughout the system. And she read every line carefully before putting pen to paper. The linen room in the basement was renovated into an employee support room. They kept the wooden stool in the corner, and above it on the wall was a small sign that read, "No one should have to hide their pain in order to keep a job." The hotel's first family day was held on an autumn morning, the lobby full of laughter, with tables of pastries lining the walkway. Micah ran through the lobby with an oversized hard hat fallen over his eyes, laughing loudly, his mother chasing after him with a cake in her hands, while Ruth Delacroix made both mother and son stop and eat every last bite. Emmett Kavanagh arrived before the opening time. No one came with him, and no car waited outside the door. He got 2 cups of coffee himself at the counter, then walked over to where Josie stood checking the emergency exit list and placed 1 cup beside her hand. She did not look up right away. She finished the line she had been writing, then picked up the cup, and the 2 of them stood there together looking out across the lobby. Power can buy the silence of many people for many years, but it has never been able to buy the truth. It can only delay the day when the truth speaks, and that day always comes. What one person owes another is not pity, nor is it charity. It is an honest record of what was done to them. Some lives spend a lifetime hoping only to be recorded truthfully, and sometimes justice is not a sentence, but simply a name returned to where it belongs. If this story has touched something in your heart, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share it so that more people may hear it. We would truly love to know how you feel about Josie's story and her father's story, and what you think helped her make it all the way to the end of the road. Please leave a comment below, because every heartfelt word you share is the most precious thing to us. We wish all of you listening today abundant health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.